October 7th, the date that shattered everything. A nightmare that echoes in the heart of every Israeli. The immediate question for us is what went wrong? But the deeper, more urgent question is this: who gets to write the story? Who holds the pen that will draft the official narrative of one of the darkest days in our history? Now, this isn't just about healing, it's about accountability, it's about security, it's about establishing a truth that will guide Israel's future. And as an election year looms, the demand for that truth is boiling down to one mechanism: a commission of inquiry of some kind. Now, we all know we need one, so what's the holdup? The answer now lies in a bitter, high-stakes clash between the government, the Attorney General, and the Supreme Court. The body meant to forge national consensus has become the prize in a brutal legal and political fight. Now, today on Basic Law, we unpack this volatile showdown and reveal the power and the legacy of commissions of inquiry in the story of Israel. I'm Aylana Meisel, and this is Basic Law. Joining us now with his piercing legal analysis is our returning expert on all things constitutional law, Dr. Yaakov Ben Shemesh. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Aylana. Shalom. It's a pleasure to be here and talk with you again.
It is a pleasure to have you always, if not on the most pleasant of topics. So we're going to get into the actual mechanisms and the big fights about them, but it would be great if you could open and kind of frame this for us to stress the importance of this discussion. There are a lot of big stories right now. Just this morning, there are fights and screaming breaking out in the Supreme Court over the Haredi draft. That's going to be the big issue over the coming, well, it's been a big issue for a while, but certainly over the coming week, because there's draft legislation on the topic. The ceasefire in Gaza is kind of on and off. And so the question is, well, why is it important to talk about this issue right now when it's basically been this constant drumbeat for 2 years, right? With occasional punctuation. So how would you frame it?
Well, that's a very good question. You mentioned two reasons why this commission of inquiry is so important, and I would like to add a third one. One reason you mentioned is, of course, to try and understand what went wrong. What were the failures that led to this catastrophic event of October 7th? Right at the beginning, I have to say that when we say failures, there are two kinds of failures. One of them is relatively short term of what happened that night. What happened the day before, 2 days before? Why is it that our Shin Bet, the security services, the army, they didn't realize what was going on? Why is it that they missed all the signs, all the information that was streaming in during that night and the day before and the day before that? Why were not the soldiers on their bases? Why were not they given a heads up to be ready? So these are kind of short-term, mostly failures of our security forces, the Shin Bet, the intelligence in the army, and the army itself. Then there are the questions that are larger. What were the conceptual failures that prevented us from seeing what was going to happen? And here we come to the more broader questions that involve the political figures, the prime minister, the defense minister, and whole concepts of what was going on here. Why is it that we thought that Hamas was deterred, right? That was a slogan for years. Hamas is deterred. They just want quiet, not peace. Nobody said peace, but they just want quiet. We just give them money and they will calm things down and we can handle it. This kind of, that was a more conceptual question. And even broader than that, we can talk about what went wrong since the Oslo Accords of 1993. What made us think that any kind of peace was possible? What made us even able to fall asleep in this way and trust that the enemies are not these bloodthirsty murderers that they turned out to be? So you see, what went wrong can be looked at from very different perspectives with very different scales, okay? So this is the first question, what went wrong? The second question you mentioned, which is extremely important, is controlling the historical narrative of how to tell the story. Okay? Even in the very short things I mentioned, you can see that there are different ways of talking about it. How do you describe the peace illusions? Were they illusions? How do you describe our behavior towards the Hamas? And then there is the third question, which is not as important, but is very crucial. And it's short term, but it's very crucial. Who's to blame? That's the question. You mentioned accountability. Who's to blame? Who must resign and go home? And people think that the Commission of Inquiry will address all these questions. And there are different ways of attributing and distributing the blame. There's plenty of blame, Aylana. There's plenty of blame for everyone. They don't need to argue about who's to blame. They're all to blame. But under this, they're all to blame. Who is to be blamed more? And what should be the consequences of this placing the burden of blame, placing the burden of accountability? Should the prime minister be able to continue holding his office? Other army officials and Shin Bet officials already, some of them retired, right? The chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, retired. The head of the Shin Bet was fired. The head of the intelligence department in the army resigned. So some of them already went home, but still they didn't give us responses, answers, and some think they should be criminally investigated because some of these failures were not just conceptual failures, they were actually criminal negligence that led to devastating results, and they should bear the criminal responsibility. So you have different levels of responsibility, different levels of blame, different levels of consequences, and various political factors try to shape and form this commission of inquiry in a way that will be more favorable to the way they want the results to look like. So if you support the government, you want a commission of inquiry that will be not as harsh on the political level, and they will place more of the blame on the army and the Shin Bet failures, for example. But if you are against the government, maybe you want to use the commission to finally achieve the goal, which is to get rid of Netanyahu. As we had it before, we had prime minister resign after major failures and commissions of inquiry. That was Golda Meir in 1974, right after the Yom Kippur War.
No, I would actually like to really dissect the mechanism of the Commission of Inquiry. And
Yes.
I'd like this historical context because I'm going to be extremely, it's going to be kind of a crash generalization. But basically, if you look at all the different times that we've had some kind of public argument about moving this mechanism forward, and there have been proposals to do so. As far as I can see, the legal system wants what's called a state commission of inquiry. The government and some of the MKs prefer something called, I think, a government commission of inquiry, and they're constructed differently, and they have different powers and they have different personnel. So it's all stuff that we should get into, especially because again, it's one of the places where kind of the discussion on Israeli law and governance and the culture wars are colliding
Right.
in very major ways, even though if you look, let's say, at the English language press, generally, this is not a constant presence there. It's very much a presence here in Israel. It matters a lot to Israelis, and even if the commission doesn't conclude, whenever it arises, doesn't conclude its work by the time that we had the next elections, setting that narrative um, is vital. And I think it's actually vital not even for political reasons. It's just vital to many people to understand just how all of the premises that we had and all of the people that we trusted or the institutions that we trusted failed in that particular moment. Okay, so why don't we first zoom out and then we'll go back in. So the zoom out is commissions of inquiry, right? What are the different kinds? What do they do?
Okay.
And then we'll add a little bit of historical flavor because I know that you're familiar with all of this down to the the finest detail.
We have two options in our legal system, two laws basically that allow the government to form a committee of inquiry. The first law is the called Chok Vadot Hakira, the Committee of Inquiries Law. Okay, that was enacted in 1969. The decision is upon the government. Section 1 of this law says if the government is interested in forming a commission of inquiry into a matter of national interest, they can do so. So the government has to decide whether or not to form a committee under this law. But once the government decides to form a committee under this law, the matter is then moved to the hands of the Chief Justice, the President of the Israeli Supreme Court, because the law says, the next section says, if the government decides to form a committee under this law, the members of this committee will be appointed by the President of the Supreme Court. So the government does not get to choose under this path the members of the committee. It's the President of the Supreme Court that gets to choose the members of the committee, and the head of the committee has to be a retired or a presiding justice. So that's the first option. Now, this is the most serious kind of national committee of inquiry we can have because the powers they have are great. They can summon witnesses, they can request and get all kinds of reports from the army, from the Shin Bet, from government ministries. People who testify there testify under oath. They will suffer legal consequences if they do not tell the truth. So it's the closest thing we have to court proceedings. And they have great powers, these members of the committee and the state committee of inquiry under this first law. The second option we have is under the government law, Chok HaMemshala, Section 8. Section 8 of the government law says the government has the power to form a committee of inquiry into a matter that they think should be inquired, and then the government decides who is going to chair this committee and who are going to be the members of the committee. So the major difference between the state committee under the state committee of inquiry law and the government law is who gets to appoint the members. The government committee does not have the same powers as the state committee, but the government is allowed under the government law to give the government committee the same powers that the state committee has under the state committee law. So this is the first issue of who appoints the members of the committee and what are the powers of the committee. The second question is, and here the answer is the same to both kinds of committees. The second question is, what is the scope? What are the questions that the committee must address? In both cases, it is the decision of the government. The government can just list the questions. We would like the committee to inquire, number one, what went wrong on October 7th, the night before? What went wrong on October 6th? What went wrong on the first days of the war? And that they can decide that that's the only question they want to ask. So the mandate of the committee is determined by the government, and the scope of the questions the committee can ask, which is a major issue, of course, is upon the government. And we had examples before of the government forming a state commission of inquiry, but requesting that the state commission will not address the question of the responsibility of the prime minister and the ministers.
Really? So what happened?
That was the Agranat Committee right after Yom Kippur War, when there was a lot of pressure on the government to form a state inquiry commission. And they formed the state inquiry commission, but they explicitly said, we are not authorizing this committee to deliver any conclusions upon the prime minister, the defense minister, or the government. We only authorize them to inquire into the failures of Amman, the intelligence branch of the army, the Mossad, and the Shin Bet.
And
And
was
that
there some kind of, I'm sorry, but I really want to follow this up. Was there some kind of public backlash to that? Did the commission keep or the committee keep to its mandate, or did it expand it?
it was during the days uh, when justices actually kept to the limits of their legal authority. Agranat, who headed this government, this commission, explicitly said, we are not going even to question the limits that the government placed on our work. We are just going to do our work. And they delivered this report. The result of this report was that the chief of staff resigned, the chief of the Mossad resigned. So there were a whole bunch of soldiers and security people who resigned. The government was not involved because there were no conclusions. But the social and political backlash was such that with no conclusions from the committee, the government fell. Golda Meir had to resign. So you see, that's a very interesting point. The Agranat Committee shows you the limits of the committee of the inquiry, the state committee of inquiry. They have the powers that the government gives them, but the government cannot run away from responsibility, even if the committee does not discuss it, if the political pressure is strong enough. So this is not a legal question, but we have to remember that it is upon the government to decide what are the questions that the committee should discuss. Okay? So just to summarize, there are two questions that need to be addressed. One is the kind of committee. Is it a state committee or is it a government committee? And the second question is, what are the questions? What are the mandate of the committee? And these are both decisions that the government should make.
I think at the crux of the matter is, well, there's something before I go into the politics of it, which is, again and again and again, we come up against this idea of institutional independence, interpreted in Israel in a very different way than it is abroad. So the idea is, as you said, obviously, this is by law, the government does not appoint the members of the committee. The president of the Supreme Court does. But the way
Under
that is,
the state committee of inquiry.
yes, the state, correct. The government commission, they do. But the state commission of inquiry is really what the legal system here is saying is needed
Absolutely.
so far. And the reason is that is, a politically independent commission.
So they say.
So they say, which is, that's kind of the issue, is that in Israel today, I'm not sure what is considered to be politically independent in practice. It's quite clear that there's a lot of politics between the branches at this point. And yet, the narrative about a state commission of inquiry in which the president of the Supreme Court, who is very much at odds with the government, and the attorney general being involved in this is very much at odds, would be that the commission is politically independent and the government is politically motivated, when in fact it's really both. Okay, so that's one. But basically the fight is, if I read it correctly, the government wants the focus at the very least to be I don't know if it would exempt itself. I would hope it would not exempt itself. Perhaps it would. You can be a better judge of that than I. But it definitely wants to expand the focus of the inquiry to the role of the protests and the movement to encourage refusal to serve, and to the role of the legal system and decisions that have been made over the course of the years that modified, for instance, the rules of engagement on the Gaza border. And I think that the idea is, if you have a state commission of inquiry that is headed by that is appointed by the president of the Supreme Court, the assumption is that will not happen, right?
Exactly.
So, right. And whereas the government, as you said earlier, the focus would be on the government. Has there ever been a clash like this, for putting aside Agranat, which occurred before the court started growing its power?
Yes, of course. 10 years ago, a little bit more than 10 years ago, after the Second Lebanon War, that many consider to be a failure, there was a public outcry and they wanted a state commission of inquiry. And Ehud Olmert, who was the prime minister, refused to form a state commission of inquiry, and he formed a government commission of inquiry, and he appointed. He was then a justice of the Jerusalem District Court. He was retired by then, Eliyahu Vinograd. So that was the Vinograd Commission of Inquiry, and they also limited their power not to deliver any definite conclusions concerning the political figures. And there was a petition to the Supreme Court saying that the government is not allowed to do that because they're politically motivated, they control the members of the committee, they control the scope of the issues that the committee is allowed to discuss, and in this way we are not getting the right kind of committee. And the Supreme Court at that time rejected the petition, saying it is the authority and the power of the government under the law, and we're not questioning. We don't have the power. We do not take the power to abolish the committee that the government decided to form and require the government to form another kind of committee. I do not expect it to be different this time. If the government decides, I don't think they will, because the government will not do that because it will not pass the political sphere criticism. It will not be accepted by the Israeli public. I don't think. I'm not sure. I don't know. I already read some rumors that they are negotiating with the retired Justice Yosef Elron, trying to convince him in 2 months, when he's finished with the 3 months of retirement from the court, to head this kind of governmental commission of inquiry. That might happen. So we had this before. We had a government that was under a lot of pressure to form a state commission of inquiry. The prime minister refused. He formed a government commission of inquiry, and the government commission of inquiry delivered a report which is considered to be a fairly good, professional, and helpful, not political but helpful report. But that the Vinograd Commission, I think, was a success. So it could happen, but I don't. So it's not, legally speaking, they can do it again. We have a precedent. We have a war. We have a government. We have a prime minister. We had one that decided to go the government commission route and not the state commission route. One more thing we have to add now is that 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, and whenever it was that the Vinograd Commission was formed, the tension between the Supreme Court and the government was not nearly as huge as it is today. The court was political 10 years ago, this is true, but it was not as political as it became 2 years ago. The court became very political during the judicial reform debates in Israel. The court almost aligned itself with the protests. The court almost aligned itself with the opposition. So asking the government today to form a state commission of inquiry and giving the power to decide who is going to sit on this commission to a person who wrote not one and not two, quite a few Supreme Court decisions. I'm talking about Justice Itzhak Amit, who show plain hostility to the government. I think, even legally speaking, it is out of the question. The only reason we have this respect to the State Commission of Inquiry and to the President of the Supreme Court, the only reason we trust him to form this kind of committee. In Hebrew, we call it Vadat Chakira Mamlachtit. I don't even know how to translate Mamlachti. How do you
It's a
translate?
challenge because I don't think there's a literal translation, but it basically is taken to mean a kind of,
Apolitical?
it is the act of being stately. It is apolitical, and it is neutral, and it is oriented towards solving problems with the interest of all the state in mind.
Exactly. The general common good, and not partisanship, not political party one against another. They're not mamlachti in this sense. So the only reason we have this, it is embedded inside the term Vadat Hakira Mamlachtit, is that they are apolitical in this sense. Once the Supreme Court, as an institution, and Justice Itzhak Amit in particular, once they become so political, so dramatically political, there is no sense in even talking about this kind of state commission of inquiry as mamlachti anymore. They are not ועדת חקירה ממלכתית because they are not apolitical. They reflect the political motivations, the political views of the opposition. That's fine. Well, it's not fine at all. But whatever it is, they are not to be trusted anymore as a in the way that you could talk about the Agranat Commission of Inquiry, okay, of 1973, or Badat Kahan, the Kahan Commission of Inquiry after the First Lebanon War. We're not in the same political spectrum at all. Things change so much in our Supreme Court that it doesn't even make sense to me to use the term State Commission of Inquiry to describe a commission of inquiry that will be appointed by Itzhak Amit. It's just a contradiction in terms.
So let me ask this from the reverse perspective, right? Because we do need something. We do need a mechanism that addresses everybody's concerns. Let's you and me be mamlachti, okay? And
so let us first then, before we move to your question, let us first then say it's too bad we lost this mechanism of State Commission of Inquiry. It's too bad that justices of the Supreme Court did not listen because people told them, stop being so political, it's going to harm our nation. Here is one harm. We lost this very important tool that the Israeli public used to have of a State Commission of Inquiry to inquire into matters of national importance. We lost it. And the reason we lost it because they were so political and didn't listen to warnings and to judges and to professors who told them, if you're going to be so political, we are all going to pay the price. So we're paying the price. Just to say, we told you so. That was the moment of we told you so.
It's on the record. It's on the record.
Okay.
No, Ashai, look, we have one of our mutual friends, right? Gil Bringer is I would say probably considered a more conservative legal mind, and he's had a lot of experience both in the legislature and in the government, and now more so in academia. And he's a public figure that writes a lot on these issues. And he had this idea recently. He goes, look, the president of the court is a controversial figure these days, but what he could do, theoretically, is delegate his powers to his vice president, which is Justice Solberg. And Justice Solberg is, we'll use the term since we've used it, a more mamlachti figure, even though he's perceived to be a non-activist judge or a less activist judge. And the government will trust Justice Solberg, and people, I think, including those that have concerns about the court, would more so trust Justice Solberg. And the court would still have its man there creating the commission. So I thought that was a creative way of thinking about this. What do you think of that idea? And are there other compromises that we might consider? Because you're talking as if this entire thing is just a dead proposition. It's gone. It's only the government or the State Commission of Inquiry. And I'm not sure that you end up serving a critical mass of the Israeli population that way, because somebody in their own 20 or 30% or higher of the population will be either disappointed or feel like the story is yet to be closed.
The problem is, the way I see it, the problem is that most solutions that make good sense require new legislation.
Okay.
And new legislation requires some kind of bipartisan work in our Knesset. And I do not think that our Knesset is capable, in this last year of this government, in an election year, is capable to address this very important issue in an even-handed way to solve the problem. I don't trust that the Israeli public, through its representatives in our Knesset, are capable to solve this problem of the Commission of Inquiry because it will require a new kind of legislation. I don't even think Gil Bringer's proposition, which is a very creative one, is legal. I'm not sure. I have my doubts.
There's fighting words. We're
No,
gonna have to
I
talk
think,
to my
well, you look, there are some powers that
yeah.
the person who has the power can delegate them to others, and there are powers that are not non-delegatable. I don't know how do you say it in English. Enanita not latsala. You cannot delegate certain powers you have. For example, the power that our attorney general, the attorney general has the power to decide whether or not to press charges against the prime minister. The attorney general has the power to sign the charges against the prime minister. This is not something you can delegate to some other lawyer in the Justice Department, because there's a reason why the law says the attorney general and not someone else. I doubt it very much that according to law, the Israeli law and legal norms of administrative law, the president of the Supreme Court can so simply delegate the power to appoint a state commission of inquiry to someone else. Now, the idea is good. I think legally speaking, it's complicated. And I will add, politically speaking, it's not going to happen. Itzhak Amit will never agree to this kind of insult, okay? To admit so publicly that he became so politically controversial that he cannot be trusted to be this mamlachti president of the Supreme Court, and he has to delegate the powers to someone else. He will never do that. So I don't think, politically speaking, it is going to happen. And legally speaking, I think it might require a change in legislation. And any change in legislation, I don't think is possible, because we as a public and our Knesset, we are not capable at this time to solve this problem. That's why I think we only have two ways to go. The third way will be, we'll just enact a new law. It's very simple. You will appoint Justice Solberg to be the head of the committee, and then two members appointed by the coalition, two members appointed by the opposition. What's the problem? If you want to have a mamlachti body, it's not a problem. There are 100 suggestions I can come up with in 1 hour. The problem is it's not going to happen. We don't have this power today. Our political institutions are too divided. The public is too divided to solve this problem. It's sad, but it's not the end of the world. There are greater problems on our table today than the fact that we cannot find a way to solve the problem of a commission of inquiry. I will be pretty happy with the government going either way. I think it will go the government state commission of inquiry, because the other option is just impossible. And then we'll see what the court will do.
There's even another option here, although I don't want to make things too speculative. I would actually like to bring it back to what's happening now in the court, because this is in the court, and the government has been told that within 2 weeks or so at this point, they have to submit a response. What is it about what kind of committee they want?
Yep,
Or
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly the question we're discussing. This is the
yeah.
question they will have to answer. Again, I don't know. They have 2 weeks. It is because it's incomprehensible to me that they will agree to a state commission of inquiry. The only response the government can give, well, the response they gave until now is that we are in the middle of the war. Let's wait.
Right. It's
That
becoming, I
ended.
think, a little bit less compelling to people.
Yeah.
Just more broadly, and
So now they will have to say what they, and I think they will say what I just said. We are going the government commission of inquiry route.
and who's hearing that case? Is Justice Amit involved?
He is, but I think it's a pretty conservative three-member court. I think it's Mintz and maybe Solberg. Now, look, it's
Interesting.
interesting.
I just,
Yeah,
I think in the States too, if you were a justice who was potentially personally involved in the case, you would recuse yourself.
of course.
Just a point. So within a couple of weeks, we'll have a little more clarity on what the government says it wants to do. Although, parentheses, even if a commission is established at some point this year, then historically it could take a very, very long time. And I suppose, given the scope of this kind of inquiry, it would. A
It will
very
take
long time on the
years,
part. It'll take, yeah.
years, Lala,
So,
years.
right. Which means you're going to have a constant flow, probably, of leaks and information coming out, affecting, kind of rocking the public in different ways over a very long period of time, but you won't have a firm conclusion. I wonder what happens if is not resolved by the time that we have elections. We go into the next cadencia, the next
Sure.
term, right? And you have a very different kind of coalition, given all of the chaos now with the Haredim. And it looks like there may need to be some kind of, maybe, this is obviously all speculative, but kind of realignment politically, where some of the parties currently in the opposition and many in the coalition unify, and then you have a very different approach to this potentially.
There are people saying, exactly for the reasons you mentioned, Aylana, there are people saying that this is, of course, not a legal question, just a political analysis,
Yeah.
that it is better to wait. Oh, okay. Because one way or another, we're not going to have any conclusions by the time of the next election. So it's not as if this commission is going to make any difference to the next elections. So why not wait and let the new government that will be elected at the end of next year, at the latest? We don't know. The elections may be earlier. They might happen in June. Who knows?
It
And
may, yeah.
let the next government decide this issue and hope, just as you said, let's hope that the next government will not be as one-sided as it is today, and the opposition will not be as one-sided as it is today, and maybe the next government that will be some kind of, I don't know, maybe not a national unity kind of government, but more of a national unity kind of government, they will be able to solve the problem that currently is not soluble. I don't think it's a bad idea, but now we have the timetable of the court, and we have the timetable of the government actually saying it. If the government will say that, I doubt that they will. But if the government says, "Well, look, we have this hot potato, let's postpone it to the next government," that will be an interesting issue for the court, whether or not they will accept the idea to postpone the decision to next year or the year after that. That's an interesting question.
It does raise the question of incentives because, given that there is such polarization right now between the sides, nobody has a great incentive to compromise, and the only side that potentially benefits, assuming there's a realignment politically, is the one that's more aligned with the legal system. But a story that we will continue to follow. I'm glad we've given it some prominence. It's been so blatant and recurring within Israeli news, and just not given, I think, the appropriate treatment in English. And so I thank you
Thank
very
you,
much,
Elamon.
and I look forward to talking with you again at some point soon.
Toda rabba. Thank you very much.